Just how serious is President Trump about imposing tough new sanctions on Russia unless it agrees a ceasefire in its war with Ukraine? Today, Trump has imposed a 25% tariff on India, which is the second biggest importer of Russian oil. The move comes after a meeting at the Kremlin between Vladimir Putin and the US Envoy Steve Witkoff. The Kremlin called those talks useful and constructive. So what next? Joining me now is Dr Neil Melvin, Director of International Security at the Royal United Services Institute. Neil, we have these brief images of today's encounter at the Kremlin. Moscow says a bit cryptically that Russia received some signals and sent some in return. What are we to make of what's going on, especially in the light of these new tariffs imposed on India?
Well, I think the first thing is it's very clear now that President Trump is growing rather tired of these protracted discussions with Russia. I think he remains committed to his central goal, which is to get a peace agreement around the Ukraine conflict. And it's also turning out, I think, for him that his initial approach has failed. And so he's starting to change tactics. But on the Russian side, they still remain focused on their main goal, which is plan A is to win the war in Ukraine. And to try and then keep these sort of negotiations with the United States going on for as long as possible, to keep pressure off, to allow the war to be prosecuted in Ukraine, because Putin feels that he can win the war.
The deadline that Trump set is Friday. It's only Wednesday today, and yet he's imposed these Indian tariffs. Is that a warning by the White House to Putin? You know, you've really got to take this seriously?
I think Trump is trying to build up pressure. I mean, he does this in negotiations. First of all, he gave a 90-day period in which Russia had to respond. Then he shrunk it down. And now, as you say, he's imposed initial sanctions reportedly against India on top of existing tariffs or on sort of their trade to try and increase this pressure. So he tries, this is one of his negotiation tactics. He tries to build pressure. But Putin, I think, is ready for this. I mean, they've seen this before. They know what's coming. And I think they feel reasonably confident on the Russian side that they can handle this pressure for the moment.
Is there anything that Putin can give to the Americans now? There's been some talk of possibly some kind of ceasefire in the air war. Is that the kind of thing that Vladimir Putin might be prepared to give Donald Trump?
I mean, I think the Russians will dangle these sort of ideas again to try and protract the negotiations, to create a bit of confusion, to require further meetings and conversations. On the American side, we don't know precisely what Witkoff, Trump's representative, said to Putin. There was some speculation that while the public messaging is very much about pressure on Russia, he may also be offering some carrots. He may have dangled some carrots towards Russia to try and move this process forward. So I think we're still seeing a little bit of jockeying on both sides around this. But Trump is clearly intent on trying to ramp things up. Part of the confusion may also be because he's now targeting secondary sanctions, namely he wants to hit other countries that are trading with Russia. And so India is the main target. But there's a side deal underway between the United States and India on trade. So all of these security questions are going to be mixed up with other bilateral economic questions. We don't really know where things will finally settle.
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? The White House seemed to be suggesting potentially 100% sanctions on anybody, or tariffs rather, on anybody who does any kind of trade with Russia. When it comes to oil and gas, that's China, India, Turkey. The EU is still a customer. I mean, that's a really big move. Do you think the Kremlin will be thinking, when it comes to it, Donald Trump probably isn't quite brave or brave enough to make that kind of move?
Well, I suspect that'll be the Kremlin calculation. I mean, these are big, powerful countries, big, powerful markets. Trump is only really putting pressure on India at the moment, which is interesting. As you mentioned, Turkey and China are also trading, but he hasn't really targeted those. And as I said before, I mean, there is this parallel conversation with India about the bilateral trade agreement. Trump is not averse to mixing up security issues with trade issues. And so it's still not totally clear whether the focus of what he's doing is actually Russia, or is it this bilateral agreement that they're trying to hammer out with India on the trade side.
There's a follow-up question, of course, which is if Trump makes good his threat in all its to the extreme that he could do, how effective would fresh sanctions and tariffs be, given how very good Russia has been in getting round previous sanctions?
Well, I think there's no doubt it would make life more complicated for Russia, but they have grown quite sophisticated in their ability to sidestep tariffs. And they've also been talking to their friends, such as Iran, who survived under even more stringent forms of sanction and tariff policy than Russia has at the moment. There's also uncertainty about how global energy markets will react to this. Will the price, in fact, rise for oil and gas, which would, of course, be to Russia's advantage, at least initially? The biggest damage to Russia might be if the United States could find a way to lower those prices, but tariffs won't be the way to do that. So the shockwaves of this policy, again, it's a bit unpredictable precisely how that is going to play out.
We get used to talking about dangerous moments in the Russia-Ukraine war, but how risky an instance is this we're at? We've got just a few days ago Trump saying publicly that he's positioned nuclear submarines in response to what the former Russian president has been saying. You've got this threat of tough sanctions. Are we at another moment where we should be holding our breath and worrying what comes next?
Well, I think we are reaching a point in which Russia's policy of trying to drag things out, Trump is clearly very frustrated with that, and he wants to sort of up the stakes. So we don't really know how far he's willing to go. There's a lot of rhetoric at the moment. There's some initial steps. In the past, he's sort of leaned forward and then stepped back. But there is a risk that Russia is seen in the White House as calling his bluff, putting him in a corner. So I think part of the discussions that we have seen today in Moscow between Witkoff and Putin will also be the Russians trying to offer something that will allow the Americans to step back a little bit from this pressure strategy and to buy a bit more time for their efforts to sort of turn this into a further round of negotiations.
And what about President Zelensky there in Kyiv? He said that he doesn't think that Russia will find a way towards peace until it starts losing money. He obviously must be loving the noises coming out of the White House now. Do you think he is feeling more satisfied with how things are going now after that appalling start to Trump's presidency from a Ukrainian point of view?
Well, there have been some substantial changes. There's now a new mechanism in place whereby European allies can buy American weapons and send those to Ukraine. And that's a big step forward to Ukraine because they were really beginning to be pressed because of lack of certain capabilities, particularly on the air defense side. And so I think he'll be satisfied with that, and the fact that there does seem to be this shift regarding Trump's willingness to put pressure on Moscow. But Trump's ultimate goal has not really changed. He still remains focused on this ideal that there can be, first of all, a ceasefire, and then that would lead to a peace deal. And I don't think Ukraine really believes that's realistic, frankly. What they see is Russia is continuing to press every day on the battlefield. It's making incremental, but nonetheless significant progress. It's wearing down Ukrainian defenses. And that remains really what Russia is focused on primarily.
And there's nothing for Russia in a ceasefire, is there, if Putin's calculation is correct, which is that Russia is slowly but surely winning the war?
Well, I think Putin feels that the summer offensive is the chance for them to make a decisive shift on the battlefield. So he's trying to buy time with these negotiations. And so for him, exactly the big prize is to defeat Ukraine and to impose the Russian version of a peace agreement on the Ukrainians. And that's what all of these negotiations are really designed to achieve.
Neil, do you feel any sense of optimism about the coming weeks and months in terms of a truce, a ceasefire, perhaps the beginning of the end of this war?
At this point, I think the only window is likely to be towards the end of the year. If the Russians haven't broken through, things begin to move against the Russians at that point. They are running out of certain capabilities. The Russian economy does look a bit weaker. And so these kind of tariff approaches, which won't really have an immediate impact on Russia, they may begin to start to squeeze the economy more. And at that point, Russia may make a calculation that actually there is a better interest in trying to go for an advantageous peace agreement than there is at the moment.
So we wait with bated breath to see what the White House does on Friday when its deadline passes. For now, though, Dr. Neil Melvin, thank you very much for your time.